She didn't walk down the aisle, she was dragged to it. And the man waiting for her at the altar, he didn't love her, he didn't even know her name until 3 days ago. This is the story of a girl who was sold by her own father to pay a debt, a billionaire who thought he could buy anything, and a truth so devastating, so completely unexpected that when it finally came out, it didn't just destroy one family, it destroyed everything. Stay with me, because I promise you by the time this story is over, you will never forget it. The morning of the wedding, Emma Carson stood in a white dress that didn't belong to her, in a bathroom that smelled like expensive soap and fresh flowers, and she stared at herself in the mirror and said one thing out loud. "I will survive this." Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were dry because she had already cried everything out the night before, alone on the floor of a hotel room that had been paid for by a man she had never chosen. She was 22 years old. She had never been on a date. She had never been kissed. She had spent the last 4 years working double shifts at a diner to help her father pay his bills, skipping meals so her little sister could eat, and sending every dollar she could spare back home. And now her father had used her as a bargaining chip. Not a daughter, a bargaining chip. The knock on the bathroom door was gentle but firm. "Miss Carson, it's time." She looked at herself one more time. She straightened her spine. She opened the door. And she walked into the rest of her life. But before we go any further, I need to take you back. Because to understand how Emma ended up standing at that altar, you need to understand where she came from, and what was really hiding underneath the surface of this entire story. Because nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, is what it appears to be. Emma grew up in a small town in Ohio called Millfield. If you blinked while driving through it, you'd miss it. 2 traffic lights, 1 grocery store, a diner called Ray's where everybody knew everybody, and where Emma had worked since she was 16 years old. Her mother passed away when Emma was 14. Cancer. The slow kind that takes everything from a family before it finally takes the person. Medical bills piled up. Her father, Robert Carson, was a good man once, a gentle man, a man who used to read bedtime stories and make Saturday morning pancakes and coach Little League even though he'd never played baseball a day in his life. But grief does something to people. It cracks them open, and sometimes what pours out isn't light. Robert started drinking after Emma's mother died, quietly at first, then openly, then desperately. He lost his job at the auto parts factory when Emma was 17. He started borrowing money, small amounts at first from neighbors, from friends, from the church collection fund that nobody was supposed to know about. Then the amounts got bigger, and the people he borrowed from got more dangerous. By the time Emma was 22, her father owed $230,000 to a man named Vincent Harlow. Now, Vincent Harlow was not a loan shark in the traditional sense. He didn't send men with bats to break your kneecaps. He was far more sophisticated than that. He was a businessman, a developer, a man who operated just barely inside the law and who had a very particular way of collecting what he was owed. He called it a trade arrangement. And the arrangement he proposed to Robert Carson was this: his debt, all $230,000, would be wiped clean, completely forgiven, in exchange for one thing. Emma. Not to Vincent himself. Vincent had a nephew who was 31 years old, obscenely wealthy, and who, according to the rumors that Emma would later hear, had a reputation that made women cross to the other side of the street. His name was Cole Harlow, and he was about to become Emma's husband. Now, before you judge Robert Carson too harshly, I want you to sit with something uncomfortable for a moment, because Robert didn't agree immediately. He argued. He pleaded. He offered everything else he had, which was almost nothing, but he offered it. He spent 3 nights unable to sleep, packing the kitchen, calling numbers he hadn't dialed in years, trying to find another way. But there was no other way. And Vincent Harlow had made it very clear what would happen if Robert refused. It wasn't Emma who was threatened. It was Lily, Emma's little sister, 17 years old, a junior in high school, a girl who wanted to be a veterinarian and who still slept with a stuffed rabbit their mother had given her when she was 4. Vincent Harlow looked Robert Carson in the eye and said, very calmly, that there were other ways to collect a debt, that a man's children were, in a sense, his most valuable assets, and that he could be patient. He could wait until the debt grew, until Robert had nothing left to sell except the things he loved most. Robert signed the agreement the next morning. And then he had to tell Emma. Emma was at work when he came in. It was a Tuesday, slow afternoon, and she was wiping down the counter when she saw her father walk through the door. She knew immediately that something was wrong, not because he looked sad. Robert Carson always looked a little sad these days. She knew because he looked broken in a way she had never seen before. Like a man who had already accepted that he had done something he could never take back. She sat across from him in a booth in the corner. He told her everything. He didn't sugarcoat it. He didn't try to spin it. He laid it out, all of it, the debt, the arrangement, Vincent Harlow's threat, Lily's name being mentioned. And when he finished, he put his face in his hands and he wept. Emma didn't say anything for a very long time. She looked out the window at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into her car. A little boy was trying to catch a pigeon. The sky was the pale gray of an Ohio afternoon in October, and the whole world outside looked so ordinary, so completely unbothered by the fact that her life had just been handed away like a coupon clipped from a newspaper. Then she looked back at her father. And she said, "Does Lily know?" He shook his head. "Good," Emma said. "She's not going to know. Tell her I got a job offer. Tell her I'm moving for work." Robert looked up. "Emma." "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Just make sure she never finds out what you did. Because she still needs to believe that men can be good. And right now, that's more important than how I feel." She took off her apron. She placed it folded on the table. She picked up her purse. And she walked out of the diner for the last time. She met Cole Harlow for the first time 4 days before the wedding. She had expected someone who looked like a villain. She had prepared herself for cold eyes, a cruel smile. The kind of man who enjoyed other people's powerlessness. She had rehearsed exactly how she would look at him, with zero emotion, nothing he could use, nothing he could touch. She had not prepared for what she actually found. Cole Harlow was sitting at a conference table in the downtown Chicago offices of Harlow Enterprises when Emma was led in by a woman in a gray suit who explained nothing and said even less. He was on the phone. He didn't look up immediately. When he finally did, and their eyes met for the first time, something crossed his face that Emma couldn't quite read. He ended the call. He stood up. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed in the quiet, effortless way that very wealthy people dress. No logos, no flash, just quality that announced itself without trying. He looked like someone who had never struggled a day in his life, and yet there was something behind his eyes that didn't match the rest of him. Something tired. Something sad. He extended his hand. "Emma." She didn't take it. "Mr. Harlow." A pause. He lowered his hand. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that I didn't request this arrangement. My uncle operates outside of my personal." "I don't care," Emma said. "I'm here because I have no choice. I assume you're here for the same reason. Let's just agree to stay out of each other's way and make this as bearable as possible." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "Fair enough," he said. And that was the first conversation between the girl who was sold and the billionaire who had supposedly bought her. The wedding was small, clinical, a judge, a handful of witnesses Emma didn't know, no flowers at Emma's refusal, no music, no cake. Cole had offered all of it and Emma had declined every single thing because accepting any of it would have made it feel like a wedding and she refused to let it be that. When the judge asked if she consented, she paused for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said yes. Because Lily was at home in Ohio, safe, not knowing, still dreaming about veterinary school. And that was enough. The house Cole Harlow brought Emma to was not what she expected. She had imagined something cold, marble and glass, and the kind of enormous silent spaces that rich people seem to love because they've never had to be truly alone in a small apartment and understood how silence can crush you. But the house was warm, books everywhere, real books, worn spines, dog-eared pages, a kitchen that smelled like someone actually cooked in it, a garden visible through the back windows that was slightly overgrown in a way that suggested someone had once cared for it deeply and then stopped. A housekeeper named Mrs. Paulson showed Emma to her room, her own room. She had been prepared to fight for this and was quietly stunned not to have to. She sat on the bed. She looked around at the room that was now apparently her life. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, she let herself feel it. Not the anger, not the plan to survive, the actual grief of it, the loss of the life she had imagined, the small, quiet dreams she had carried, maybe her own apartment someday, maybe a man who chose her, maybe mornings where nobody needed anything from her. She pressed her face into the pillow, and she cried until she fell asleep. The first month was silence. Cole left early and came home late. He didn't intrude on her space. He didn't try to talk to her beyond what was necessary. Meals were left for her in the kitchen by Mrs. Paulson. A car was made available. A credit card had been placed on the kitchen counter with a note that said simply, "For whatever you need." Emma didn't touch the credit card for 2 weeks. Then she used it to order books. She had always loved reading but had never been able to afford it. She ordered 17 books that first time, then felt immediately guilty, then reminded herself that this man's uncle had sold her like property, and decided the guilt could go quietly sort itself out. She started reading in the garden, that slightly overgrown garden that she had noticed on the first day. One morning, about 6 weeks in, she came outside to find Cole already there. He was in old jeans and a faded shirt, which surprised her because she had never seen him in anything other than business attire. He was kneeling in the dirt, pulling weeds. He looked up, mourning. She almost turned around and went back inside. Instead, she sat in her usual chair and opened her book. They didn't speak, but they were there in the same space, existing alongside each other without combat, and somehow that felt like more than she had expected. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. 2 weeks later, Emma started helping with the garden without ever verbally agreeing to do so. She just started pulling weeds on her side. He started working on his. Their hands occasionally reached for the same thing and they would both pull back, and then one of them would take it and the other would move on. It was the strangest kind of companionship. It was also the beginning of everything. Cole Harlow had not always been who he was now. This is the part of the story that changes things. He grew up in the same Harlow family, yes, but on the edges of it. His mother was Vincent Harlow's younger sister, a woman named Patricia who had married against the family's wishes and who had spent 20 years being made to feel the cost of that decision. Cole's father was a teacher, a kind man by all accounts, but not a wealthy one, and in the Harlow family, that was as good as a crime. Cole was brilliant. Everyone agreed on that. Scholarship to University of Chicago. Business degree at the top of his class. He had built his own company, separate from Harlow Enterprises, from scratch, starting at 23 with borrowed money and an idea about logistics software that turned out to be more than an idea. By 31, he was worth nearly $400 million. But his mother was sick. Here is the thing that nobody knew. The thing that wasn't in any of the profiles written about Cole Harlow in Forbes or the Wall Street Journal. Patricia Harlow was in a private care facility outside of Chicago, early onset dementia, progressing faster than the doctors had predicted. and her care cost more than anyone would say publicly, but the number Cole had given to keep her in the best facility, with round-the-clock care and the doctors who actually knew what they were doing, was staggering. And Vincent Harlow knew about it. Vincent had approached Cole 18 months ago with a proposition. He would ensure that the debt on Patricia's care facility was quietly absorbed into the Harlow family trust, guaranteeing her care for the rest of her life, no matter the cost. All Cole had to do was participate in one arrangement that would consolidate the family's public image, a respectable marriage, a visible domestic life, because Cole, for all his wealth, was an island. And Vincent needed Cole's reputation, his clean reputation, to legitimize certain business dealings that were currently drawing the wrong kind of attention. Cole had refused. Then Vincent had shown him documents, medical documents, letters from the care facility indicating that without a substantial payment within 90 days, Patricia would need to be transferred to a state facility, a place where Cole knew, he knew in his gut, she would deteriorate faster, where she would be afraid and confused, and the person who came to see her on Sundays, the one person whose face she still sometimes recognized, would have to watch her disappear in a place that smelled like bleach and defeat. Cole signed the agreement 3 weeks later. He had been using Emma to protect his mother, just as Emma had been using herself to protect her sister. Two people sold into the same cage for the same reason. Neither of them knew it about the other. Emma found out on a Sunday in December. She had been in Cole's house for just over 4 months. Things had shifted between them in the slow, undeniable way that real things shift, not dramatically, not with a single moment she could point to, but gradually, like the way a season changes. You don't notice it happening, and then one day you look up and everything is different. She knew he took his coffee black. He knew she read until 2 in the morning and that she always came down for water around 1. And so he always left a full glass on the counter before he went to bed. She knew he had a habit of rubbing the back of his neck when he was frustrated. He knew she hummed when she was happy and went completely silent when she was hurting. She didn't love him. She was very clear with herself about that, but she had stopped hating the situation. She had started seeing him as a real person, and she thought, cautiously, carefully, that he might have started seeing her the same way. She found out about his mother by accident. She had been looking for a phone charger in the kitchen drawer, the one that had become a general repository for household odds and ends, and she found a folded letter. She wouldn't have read it except that it fell open and the name at the top caught her eye. Patricia Harlow, Sunrise Memory Care, Care Plan Review. She read it. She couldn't stop herself. And as she read, the letter explained in clinical, careful language that Mrs. Patricia Harlow's care was being funded through a family arrangement established 18 months prior, as a condition of a contractual agreement between Mr. Cole Harlow and Mr. Vincent Harlow, and that any interruption to that agreement would result in the immediate review of the current care arrangements. Emma stood in the kitchen for a very long time. Then she folded the letter exactly as she had found it, put it back in the drawer, closed the drawer, and sat down on the kitchen floor. Because the thing she had told herself, the story she had kept herself safe with, the one where Cole Harlow was the face of her captivity and everything that had been taken from her, had just become infinitely more complicated. He hadn't chosen this either. He was protecting someone he loved, just like she was. She didn't say anything to him that day, or the next. She turned it over and over in her mind, testing it from every angle, looking for the version where it was still simple, where she could still be clearly the victim, and he could still be clearly the villain, and everything could make the sense it had been making before. But the more she turned it, the more it wouldn't cooperate. On the 3rd day, she went to find him. He was in his study, working. He looked up when she pushed the door open, and something in her face made him put down whatever he was holding. "Emma, your mother," she said, "tell me about her." He told her everything. Not defensively, not strategically. He told her the way a person tells the truth when they've been carrying it alone for too long, and something in the room suddenly feels safe enough to put it down. He talked about his mother teaching him to ride a bike in their small driveway, about how she used to leave notes in his lunch even in high school because she said everyone deserved a small piece of love in the middle of a hard day. About the first time he visited her at the facility, and she looked at him with eyes that were familiar but searching, like she was trying to find a word on the tip of her tongue, and the word was him. Emma sat across from him and listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My sister's name is Lily. She wants to be a vet. She doesn't know why I'm really here." Something shifted in Cole's face. "I know," he said. Emma went very still. "You know." He held her gaze. "I found out about your father's debt about a week before the wedding. I dug into it. I know what Vincent threatened. I know about Lily. I know none of this was your choice. And you said nothing." "What would I have said? I couldn't undo it. I couldn't release you without giving my uncle grounds to withdraw from the care arrangement. I was trying to." "You were trying to manage me," Emma said. Her voice was careful, not angry, terrifyingly calm. "Like a situation, like a liability you had to contain." "No," Cole said, and the way he said it stopped her. "No, I was trying to figure out how to deserve being in the same room as you." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Emma had ever heard. Here is where I need you to pay very close attention, because this is where the story breaks open. Emma left the study. She needed air. She put on her coat and she walked out into the December night, and she sat on the garden bench in the cold, under a sky that was trying its best to produce stars through the cloud cover, and she thought about everything. She thought about her mother, dying slowly in a hospital room, while a teenage Emma sat beside her doing homework, because she didn't know what else to do with her hands. She thought about her father, broken and weak and so desperately sorry, and how sorry doesn't fill the hole that a betrayal makes, but sometimes it's all there is. She thought about Lily, 17 and bright-eyed, still carrying a stuffed rabbit, still believing the world was going to open up like a gift for her. She thought about Cole's mother, somewhere in a warm facility, not remembering today but maybe, on a good day, remembering a boy on a bike in a small driveway. And she thought about Cole Harlow, who she had planned to feel nothing for, sitting in his study looking at her like she was the only thing in the room that he didn't know how to handle, and maybe that was the most honest anyone had ever looked at her. She sat in the cold for a long time. Then she went back inside. The one nobody saw coming. 4 days later, Emma received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. The woman on the other end of the line had a voice that was quiet and slightly unsteady, but very precise. She asked if she was speaking with Emma Carson, formerly of Millfield, Ohio, daughter of Robert and Catherine Carson. "Yes," Emma said. "Who is this?" There was a pause. And then the woman said, "My name is Patricia Harlow, and I think it's time someone told you the truth about why you're really there." Emma's heart stopped, then started again, faster. "Patricia Harlow," she repeated, "Cole's mother." "Yes," the woman said. "I have good days and bad days. Today is a very good day, and I've learned to use my good days wisely because I never know how many I have left. I need you to listen to me carefully." Emma sat down. "I'm listening." What Patricia told her over the next 40 minutes restructured everything. Patricia had not always been in a care facility. 5 years ago, she had been healthy, sharp, and she had been in the process of doing something that her brother Vincent had discovered and had very much needed to stop. Patricia had been working with a federal investigator. Not publicly, quietly. She had spent years quietly collecting documentation about Vincent Harlow's business dealings, the ones that operated in the gray space between legal and not, the ones that had made him very wealthy by making other people very powerless. She had grown up watching him do it. She had watched him do it to people in their hometown. She had watched him do it to people in business. And she had decided, finally, that she was done watching. She had gathered enough evidence to be genuinely dangerous to Vincent Harlow. And then she had gotten sick. She didn't know, she said, whether the timing was a coincidence or not. She had her suspicions, but she would never be able to prove it, and so she didn't say it as fact. What she said as fact was this. When she became ill, Vincent moved quickly. He positioned himself as the compassionate family member ensuring his sister's care. He used the cost of that care to bring Cole to heel. And he made very certain that the investigation Patricia had been building went nowhere, because without Patricia's continued active cooperation, there was no case. But Patricia had been careful. She had kept copies of everything, and she had hidden them somewhere that Vincent would never look. In her son's house, in the overgrown garden, under the third stone from the left in the back left corner, wrapped in waterproof cloth inside a metal box that she had buried there herself, on a day when Cole was at work and she had still been capable of the drive and the digging and the hopping. She had been waiting for someone she trusted to find it. She had been waiting, she said, for someone who had nothing to gain from protecting Vincent Harlow and everything to lose from staying silent. She had been watching Emma through the updates that Mrs. Paulson unknowingly provided in their weekly calls, and she had decided. Emma was that person. Emma dug up the box the following morning before Cole came downstairs. Her hands were shaking again, but differently than they had shaken on the morning of the wedding. Not with fear, with something charged and electric and purposeful. The box was there, exactly where Patricia said it would be. Inside was a waterproof envelope containing documents that Emma couldn't fully understand but that were clearly meticulous, organized, dated, and extensive. There were names, numbers, account transfers, correspondence, the kind of paper trail that doesn't leave room for argument. She sat on the garden bench with dirt on her hands and a box full of justice on her knees, and she looked up at the gray December sky. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt something she had almost forgotten was available to her. Power. Real power, not over another person, power over her own story. She showed Cole that afternoon. His reaction was not what she expected. She had braced for denial or anger or the defensive shutting down of a man whose family was being exposed. Instead, he sat very still and looked at the documents for a long time, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were wet and he was trying very hard to hold his face together. She did this, he said, not a question. She was doing this before she got sick. She never stopped, Emma said. She was just waiting. Cole was quiet. Then he said, if we do this, if we take this to the right people, Vincent loses everything. The care arrangement disappears. My mother's facility. I know, Emma said. You could leave, he said. This could free you. The arrangement would be void. You could take Lily and go back to Ohio and never think about any of this again. Emma looked at him. Is that what you want? She said. The question sat in the air between them. Cole didn't answer it, not with words. They contacted the federal investigator who had worked with Patricia 5 years ago. He had never closed the file. He had kept it open, quietly, because investigators like him don't walk away from cases like this. They just wait for the evidence to exist. The evidence now existed. Vincent Harlow was arrested on a Thursday morning in January at his downtown office, in front of 16 employees and a glass-walled lobby that offered no privacy. Emma didn't watch. She didn't need to. She heard about it from Cole, who described it simply and without satisfaction. Because the kind of man Cole turned out to be didn't find pleasure in another person's downfall, even a man like Vincent. The care arrangement, as Cole had predicted, was immediately voided. Patricia's facility, reached out within 48 hours, with concerns about the continuation of her care. Cole paid for it himself, out of his own accounts directly with no conditions attached, not because he had to, because she was his mother. Emma called her father that same week. The conversation was long and not easy. Robert Carson cried. Emma didn't, not during the call anyway. She told him what had happened, all of it. She told him that Vincent Harlow was facing federal charges and that the arrangement was over and that she was free. Robert said, "Emma, I'm so sorry, I am so." "I know, Dad," she said. A long pause. "Are you okay?" he asked. She thought about it honestly before she answered, which was something she had learned to do in these months. "I think I'm going to be," she said. Lily found out. Not from Emma, not from Robert. She found out because the story made local news and someone at her school saw it and brought it to her, because that is how 17-year-olds find out things they were being protected from. Emma was sitting in the garden when Lily called. It was late January by then, and the garden was bare, but she still sat out there sometimes, because some places become yours regardless of the season. She answered on the second ring. Lily said one sentence before she started crying. "Emma, you didn't have to do that." And Emma said, "Yes, I did. You're my sister." And then both of them cried, long distance, Emma in Chicago and Lily in Ohio, until there was nothing left to cry, and they started laughing without either of them being entirely sure what was funny. But some things are beyond funny and sadness and live in a territory all their own. Spring came back to the garden. Emma hadn't left. Not because she felt she couldn't. The arrangement was over. She was legally free. Her father's debt had been addressed as part of the federal proceedings against Vincent, wiped clean in the documentation, as if it had never existed. She stayed because she chose to. That is a different thing entirely. She and Cole didn't have one big conversation where everything was declared and labeled and made official. That's not how it went. It went the way real things go, slowly, imperfectly. With wrong words and long silences, and one evening in February, where they were sitting on opposite ends of the kitchen table playing cards, and Cole said something that made Emma laugh so hard she knocked her glass of water over, and they both jumped up to clean it, and their hands touched on the same towel, and neither of them moved. And they stood there, in the kitchen, in the ordinary, beautiful mess of a life that had started as something unforgivable, and become something neither of them had language for yet. "What is this?" Emma said quietly, looking at their hands. Cole said, "I don't know, but I don't want it to stop." Emma thought about the girl she had been in that hotel bathroom on the morning of her wedding, shaking, empty, saying, "I will survive this," to her own reflection. She thought about how survival was supposed to be the ceiling. She had not accounted for what might come after it. "Okay," she said. "Just that. Okay." Patricia Harlow had a very good day in March. Cole brought Emma to meet her, and on this day, Patricia was sharp and present and funny in a dry, precise way that explained a great deal about where Cole had gotten his particular brand of quiet wit. She held Emma's hand and looked at her directly and said, "You're stronger than you know. You've always been stronger than you know. Don't let anyone tell you different, not even yourself." Emma held her hand back and said, "Thank you for waiting for the right person." Patricia smiled. "I knew it when I heard you turn down the flowers at your own wedding. A woman who refuses to let something ugly be decorated is a woman who understands the truth about things." Emma laughed. It was the kind of laugh that lives in the chest, the kind that takes up space, the kind that says, in the only language that matters, "I'm still here." Lily got into the pre-veterinary program at Ohio State University the following September. Emma cried when she found out, the good kind. She framed the acceptance letter and mailed it to her father. No note inside, just the letter, Because sometimes the thing that needed to be said wasn't something words could carry. Robert Carson put it on his refrigerator. He stopped drinking that same month. Emma didn't find out about that until Christmas. He told her in person, quietly, over coffee at the kitchen table of the house she grew up in, the one that smelled like old wood and familiarity, and he said it without fanfare, just mentioned it the way you mention a fact you've decided to keep being true. Emma put her hand over his. She didn't say anything. Some silences are not empty. This is what I want you to take from this story. Emma Carson was sold. Let's not make it soft. She was used as currency by the people and systems that were supposed to protect her. She walked into a marriage she did not choose, in a dress that wasn't hers, to a life she had not built. And yet, in that garden, in those early mornings pulling weeds beside a man who was just as trapped as she was, in a phone call from a woman with good days and bad days who had spent years quietly building something worth protecting, in a box buried under the third stone from the left, a door opened. Not the door Emma would have chosen, not the door she had dreamed about when she was a girl in Millfield, Ohio, reading library books and imagining a life where nobody needed anything from her. A different door, a real one. And she walked through it. Not because she forgave everything, not because the wrong thing stopped being wrong, but because she was still standing and the ground beneath her feet was finally solid, and the person standing next to her had chosen to be there the same way she had chosen to be there. Freely, completely, without conditions. If you are someone who has ever been placed in a position you did not choose, if you have ever protected someone at a cost that felt impossible to pay, if you have ever looked at your own reflection and said, "I will survive this," when survival felt like the most you could hope for, this story was for you. Because survival is not the end. It is the beginning of something that nobody else gets to name but you. If this story moved you the way I hope it did, please take 1 second to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this story reach someone else who might need it today. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Stories that are real in the way that matters, emotionally true, unexpectedly hopeful, and impossible to look away from. Share it with one person in your life who needs to be reminded that the story isn't over when it feels the darkest. Because Emma Carson stood in a bathroom in a dress that wasn't hers. And look where she ended up.